Comics are too expensive.
Amen.
That could be the video. I
Yep.
That's
don't
it.
We'll
think
see you next week.
I don't think there's anyone who can hear this that is going to disagree with that, because in terms of the amount of enjoyment that you get, the entertainment you get per dollar, it's got to be one of the worst investments that exists. It's a non-cheap thrill, and even compared to the other to its competitors, books, manga, comics stand out as being the most expensive form of readable entertainment. So why is that? And is there anything that we can do about that? Because we know they're too expensive. There's no doubt about it. I want to give just a small bit of historical context before we really go into this conversation in earnest. Because there was a time when comic books were considered to be a cheap form of entertainment. You could get a comic book for a quarter. Uh, Comic books didn't hit $1 until some point in the 80s. They were very cheap for a long time. And that fact has been a problem because it was difficult to earn space on shelves wherever comics were sold at the time in comparison with Time and various other magazines that had already crossed that dollar threshold. The owner of a shop just didn't make enough money on a comic book.
Well, at the time, comics were considered disposable. Really, you're supposed to read it and kind of toss it or leave it somewhere. They were not meant to be super nerd collector's items at the time because that didn't really exist.
So that was the context I wanted to add. Um, do you guys think that there is a way to solve the problem of price in comics?
Yeah, there's a real easy way actually. You make them cheaper. Like I know that sounds stupid, but they're that price because it's not like the entirety of that price is going towards all the creators. A good
Mm.
chunk of that is going towards Marvel. It's going towards DC. It's going towards whomever. Um, and that cut of the pie is completely in their control to decide how much they need to take. But that needs to be more every quarter. So even though it's as simple as just changing it, that's not going to happen.
We can all agree on that.
Yeah.
Let's shove that to the side. We got that out of the way. I think the thing that springs to mind immediately is a downgrade in quality again. You could put your comics in black and white, worse paper, you know, uh take out a cover, maybe stop with the 40 million variant covers. That's probably not ridiculous. Um, but the problem is artists, uh lowercase a, the creators have to be paid off those as well.
And the issue is because I'd say more recently, there's been an increase in cover quality and an increase in variance. So it's almost the opposite direction of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Sean, you see those cardstock covers, right? When you buy physically that are what, $1 more?
Yep, at
Yeah.
DC, yeah.
Um, and those are out there to make the justification of comics selling work. Like there's a reason why variants exist. It's for shops so they can make money from whales. That justifies the purchase of, I don't know, 125 issues, that you can get that one variant that can justify that. So there's this balancing act too, even with those things.
And even that feels crazy.
I don't personally think that variants have anything to do with the cost of comics. I think variants probably pay for themselves because of the ridiculous pyramid scheme game that goes on with those that we
Sure.
have talked about many times. I think, I personally would accept, like, I don't care about backups. And a
Yeah.
lot of times they'll tack on those 8-page backups, and now we're paying $4.99 instead of $3.99. So for me, I could just as easily take less pages not less than 20, but less pages in order to pay less money.
But then like page count is a big stickler for me too, because what's a typical book? What 20,
22,
22?
20
Yeah.
to 22. Yeah.
And typically let's say $3.99 for that book, right? If you compare that to a movie
You
ticket
hope.
and how much time investment per dollar, it's super expensive. Movie tickets, I live in New York, so they can go upwards of like $20, but you're there for like 2 hours. Comic book you read in like 10 minutes tops,
Yeah.
like a standard issue.
Yeah.
So that cost comparatively to other forms of media is huge. So it is hard to justify, especially when times are tough money wise. I think, Cale, it's what you said, right? Page quality. Like I think
Yeah.
that going
Paper
down.
quality.
I don't think we can go to a black and white. I think you can't just issue 705 is color and then decide, oh, issue 706 is now we're in black and white era. I don't think that's possible. They can maybe launch new books in black and white. That's a possibility. But I do think maybe a less glossy, more of of like a newspapery version might be a way to go to save costs. I'm not in the publishing business, so I'm not even sure about that.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing that really comes to mind in terms of the physicality of things.
I'm going to say something controversial, but I really believe this. Comic books are too cheap in the sense that if you look at the trajectory of the increase in price in comics over the years, they really haven't skyrocketed in price at any point. Yeah, they're way more expensive than 25 cents. But how long could they stay that cheap? It was already a problem in the 70s, and it's a major reason why they were. A lot of people like to say that the comic book industry left the newsstand industry behind because of the direct market, but that's not true. The newsstand industry was already pulling away from selling comics because they just weren't making much money off. So, if that's the case, which it absolutely is, that means that comic books were always underselling themselves. Notably, Jeanette Kahn, who used to be, I believe her title was president of DC Comics, she always felt like comics were too cheap and was always trying to get them to be taken on as a more serious art form. But we've reached a point where paper isn't as cheap as it used to be by any means. Creators are actually somehow being paid less money now than they were being paid 20 years ago, by and large.
Yeah.
And yet we are paying more money than we've ever paid. And there is a point at which people are going to say, we won't pay any more money. But the industry has accepted its status as a niche form of entertainment. And every single 25-cent increment that they've increased the price of comics, they've lost readers. That is how it's going to be. And go ahead.
And they've acknowledged that as
Yeah.
well, haven't they? In that it was that Didio interview
100%.
where he said, the basic stance is that, even if one person is buying $100 comic, he's canceling out the 100 people that would buy a $10 comic, or something to that effect.
And the comments always want to bring it up, but manga comparatively is much cheaper, which is a very similar medium. So I think in a way it sort of it competes for eye space there in readership.
They're similar, but I think that they're similar in very superficial ways, and a lot of people don't consider the nuance of what they're saying when they talk about the similarities. Like, for example, how many people are involved in the creation of an individual comic that have to get paid versus the amount of people that are involved in a manga creation?
I agree, and I think we understand that. But I think somebody who's looking at a Barnes and Noble and sees the prices of a manga which is typically next to a Marvel comic that is much cheaper, they're gonna think superficially.
Yeah, I was just responding to the general idea.
Sure.
And, trying to make the point that if you're watching this and hearing this and thinking about manga, you can't just think about the fact that you read them both in panels.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it than that. For me personally, I don't see myself not I don't see myself buying comics to the same degree if prices increase again. I can't it's getting to the point where there's just no way.
Wages
Okay.
aren't increasing at the same rate. You
Yeah.
know, it's unfortunate, but when I think about this, the trajectory in my head is, oh, physical comics become such a niche thing that only certain people do it, and the whole line is subjected to something much smaller.
Well, but digital hasn't decreased in price either.
And it won't.
If it does, it kills physical essentially. There's that
Yeah.
that standoff that's going on with digital and physical.
I also can't think of a reason why any company would want to do that. Like why
Yeah.
be willing to say, "Oh yeah, this 4.99 we've been able to get from you scrubs the whole time. We're going to charge $1 less for
Yep.
some reason." They're not going to do it, you know. Marvel talked earlier this year, Marvel boss Dan Buckley talked earlier this year about how they were going to try to get the price in control by putting out more books at that 3.99 price point and less at 4.99. And when he said that, it was like, wow, that's really great. Thanks, Dan. But what he meant was that non miniseries, non special events, non special creators would be those books. But who does that include? Because we're paying a Jonathan Hickman tax, we're paying a Jed McKay tax, we're paying an issue one tax, and half of Marvel's publication line is a miniseries.
Yep.
They'll
And
consider it a miniseries until they say it's not.
and what's a special event? Who gets to decide that? The guy who sets the price.
Exactly. And then they put out something called a red band when they're literally giving you 2 pages more for a
Yeah.
dollar more. When an issue with a backup costs $1 more for 8 more pages. And you know why they get away with it? Because suckers like me buy every single red band issue that comes out.
Even when you've said like, oh, it's probably not worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, guys, I don't think there's a solution. I think everything we could posit as a way to bring down prices obscures the reality that as long as the industry struggles with readership, it will struggle with price. If the same amount of people that were reading comics in 1970, whatever, had an interest in the industry as right now, they could get justified charging less because you could reliably make more money off of more people. But the industry has shrunk.
And there's so much competition. And there's so
Right.
much competition that's cheaper.
Yeah, and I don't even say that as like, oh, it's because of all the flaws of the industry. I think ultimately what isn't down, you know? A
Yeah.
lot of things are down, you know. People go to Tyler mentioned movies. People go to the movies less, you know. You could talk about TV ratings. What Nothing has the same type of TV ratings as 30 years ago. Things are diversified.
So nothing is also getting cheaper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Exactly. So I say all that to say comics don't have a unique problem in that regard.
Yeah, definitely
They
not.
just have they just have a survival problem.
Right. Exactly.
I think of it almost as like a Crisis on Infinite Earths, except comics is on. It's a slower one, running away from the Anti-Monitor's negative space. Movies and TV are a little further ahead. They might be on a Vespa, but comics it's creeping up on them.
And on some level, I would argue that comics are lucky because they have such a fervent audience who are willing to ride these waves.
It's like it or not, those collectors, if they'll spend that $100, it'll mean survival.
And idiots like me that see fucking red band and for some reason think I need that.
Yeah. That's survival. It ain't healthy, but it's trickling along.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you have an idea for how the comics industry can survive that isn't countered by one of the things that we've said already, I would love to hear it. because I am always all ears for an interesting idea for this industry. But ultimately, do I think it's dying? No, I really don't. Do I hate pulling out $4.99 to read the latest chapter of a book that I'm half interested in? Yes, I do hate that. But maybe that's a me problem. Let us know in the comments. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're digging us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.